The challenge of being a bishop a long time is you've only got one life, so you run out of stories and you start recycling them. And I often actually, after a while, I stopped telling stories from my past because I just felt like, I don't know, I felt like somehow, sometimes you tell a story trying to be encouraging and people found it intimidating instead. You know, so you kind of back off proclaiming the truth you believe because you don't want people to feel intimidated or something like that. But I really felt like as I was coming into this synod, and again, it's building on what we were talking about last year, and Bishop Anna, myself, brought 2 charges last year that were quite aligned, even though we hadn't sort of prepared them together. But I just felt like as I was coming to the synod, I was reminded of an event that turned out to be, I think, pretty formational in my life and my life direction. And it was, I'd just become a priest in the end of 2006, and in 2007, our family went on a sabbatical partly to England, and I took over a little parish in southeast London for 3 months. And in the morning I'd do the parish priest thing, which is a real privilege, but in the nights, on Sunday nights, we would just look around churches in London, as you do. And I remember these 2 experiences. Again, our children were young at the time. I remember once we went to Holy Trinity Brompton, the home of Alpha, and it was amazing because Nicky was preaching that day. So there we were, front row, Nicky was there. I'm sure he looked directly at me and knew that I was... No, he didn't. And we actually also had, I think it was St Mary's, which is another significant church in London, like HTB, and their worship band had been imported, so we got both. We got HTB and St Mary's one night together. There we were. It was like, wow. And I remember, like, this is heaven on earth coming. And I remember that was like phenomenal. And then another night, we decided we'd go to Hillsong's London. Yeah, we thought, good to go. And this particular night, Matt Redman was leading worship. I'm really dropping names now for those who are that era. And the interesting about Hillsong London is it met in a musical theatre that 6 days a week was the Queen We Will Rock You musical, and then on Sunday it turned into Hillsong. So I remember us and our children, me and Jenny, our children, who were young, we came out of the subway and we sort of followed the crowd heading towards Hillsong. And I remember we were heading to Hillsong, and there was just 6-metre bronze statue of Freddie Mercury. And Luca, who's now a priest, and again, I'm a bit embarrassed about this because, it was up to me and Jenny to do a good job of the education of our daughter. And she said, "Who's that?" Shame on us. So straight away I said, Matt Redman. He was big. He was big back then. So we went into Hillsong with Matt Redman leading worship. And it was all you could, it was amazing. You couldn't get better than that. Well, we could. Tonight was actually excellent. Full credit to Caleb and the team. That was excellent. But we could have done with a 6-metre statue of Caleb. But it was phenomenal, as you can imagine. In both these experiences, HTB and Hillsong, I felt like, this is it. You kind of, you're never going to get better than this in the world. And it was interesting, in both cases, at HTB and in Hillsong, I really felt like God spoke exactly the same word to me. And he said this. He said, "This is great, but who will leave the 99 and go for the one?" And I really feel like that's been formational in my life. I really feel like what energises me most is leaving the 99 and going for the one. And what energises me most in my role as a bishop in this diocese is when I get to visit churches and marginal communities and see God present there. I think we often forget that the gospel grew in Nazareth, it flourished in Galilee, and it got crucified in Jerusalem. But I think often as Christians, we sort of seek Jerusalem. But I think our Saviour sought Nazareth and Galilee primarily. And so I want to again reaffirm for us, I think, how excited I am about what's just happening in the forgotten and the marginal communities across our diocese. And God is breaking in. I mean, I just turn up at different churches and I hear miraculous stories of God's faithfulness. And for me, that is the important thing. For me, I can't think of anything better to give your life for than see the gospel come in these forgotten communities, but to God, they're never forgotten because they're central to his call. And I think as a diocese, we want to continue to do that. And if you're not in one of those communities, why don't you think how to bless those communities? If you happen to find yourself in a larger population centre with a larger church, why don't you think, how can I bless those communities? How can we see the gospel flourish in every community across our diocese? I tell you what, when you go and do a confirmation and a baptism in a forgotten small community, it is awesome. It is awesome. And I think what more than that, it actually mirrors, I think, the centrality of the gospel call, which is always to the margins. It's always to those places. Pivoting again. A funny thing happened to me when I became Archbishop. I got older and stressed. No, that's probably true too. But I had this really weird experience where somebody came up to me and we're in this conversation and I suddenly got the sense that they're waiting for me as the Archbishop to ride in on my white horse and somehow change the province to save their parish. And I'm thinking, and I kind of just got that sense from them. I said, hey, hold on a minute. If you're thinking that head office or a bishop or the Archbishop is going to save you, you are dreaming. And they go, oh, that's good to know. And I said, yeah, that's right. We're not going to save you. You're responsible for the area that God's given you. Nobody loves your community like you do. Nobody has the heartbeat of your community like you do. Nobody's coming in on the white horse. The best we can do is we'll say we'll bring Uber Eats to you and support you. Because God's given you the responsibility for that place. Don't wait for somebody to cheer you on and to say, don't wait for somebody to come in with a master plan. You are the master plan. God's work in your life, filled by God's Spirit, is always the master plan in every community. And so I do want to encourage you to have that idea that God's given you the spiritual authority, the spiritual call for your community. And together we can work out how to support you in that. But we can never do it for each other. I can live it for Castle Cliff where I live, and I love it for Castle Cliff, but I can't live it for somewhere else because you've got to live it for there. But together we can bring those bonds across that will always resource that. That make sense? Pivoting again. I've noticed since becoming Archbishop that I needed to be a bit more intellectual. I noticed that all the great Christians that I related to had all read Tom Holland's Dominion. It's true. It's true. They've all read Tom Holland's Dominion. If you haven't read it, you're obviously not an intelligent Christian. Who's read it? No, just joking. Somebody has put your hand up. That's brilliant. Anyway, it's good. I'm about halfway through it. It's a long book. It's a big book. Maybe 60%. But I'm at the bit, and it's really stood out to me. I'm at the bit where we've just covered off on the World Wars, and he's comparing it to J.R. Tolkien and his writing at the time. And he makes this profound point that, again, I think we know, but it just hit me afresh. He made the point that in relation to the World Wars and Tolkien writing, it was really interesting when Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings that the Fellowship of the Ring chose never to wield the ring, and Sauron could never get that. Sauron was always expecting to see somebody claim the ring and wield the ring, but they never did. And Sauron could never understand that. And why did they never wield the ring? Well, it would have achieved what they wanted to achieve, and it would have ultimately corrupted them in the way. And I think as followers of Jesus, at this point in history across the globe, and for ourselves, I think there's a call afresh to recognise that we must never pick up the ring of power and wield it. We must never pick up the ring of power because it is tainted. And our world is consumed, I think, by people who are picking up ways of power which, even wielded for best intention, will always corrupt. And I think as a church, we need to realise that the ends never justifies the means. That the means always has to be aligned to the spirit and the fruit of Christ and the gospel. And I feel like we're at a point in history where it feels to me that Christians, in order to get the ends that they believe in, they're happy often to do all sorts of things that I think taint and corrupt ultimately. And so I just want to encourage us to be really mindful of that in our lives. The temptation is always to pick up the ring of power that the world offers to bring the transformation that the world says it will, but it never ends well. It never ends well for us. I think one of those is our relationship to money in the church. And before, in the pre-sinners, those of you who made the pre-sinners, I had a little conversation, I think, a little bit around the limitation of our synodical structures in relation to how we relate to money, I think, in many ways. For me, I find it, I lose sleep over this, actually, where I'm part of a church, and this is, by the way, this is a wondering that we're not passing emotion on this, okay? This is, I wonder whether we could do something, okay? I'm not trying to, and you need to follow God's call in your context, etc. But for me, I have a wondering where I worry that we are living off past generations' generosity and we're not paying our own way. That right across our church, centrally and often in some parish contexts, we're living on historical money. So if we're really honest, we're not paying our way. Past generations are paying for our worship, are paying for our pastoral care, are paying for our programs. I don't want to live like that. When I pass, I want to know I added value. And I'd far rather the money was spent on the hospital in Gaza. I'd far rather the money was spent somewhere else, but I don't want past generations' generosity to be spent on me. I want to pay my own way. I want to work out how we do that as a church. We are a long way off that. I'm not quite sure, I've never crunched the numbers, but I'm pretty sure there's no correlation between church wealth and church growth. I think through history there'd be, the fastest growing churches at this point in history outside the Western world do not have the wealth that we have. The issue in the church in New Zealand is never money, it's always hearts. So I want to encourage us. I come from a background, again, before being bishop, I remember I love when God miraculously turns up. I remember we were living in Cuba Street, hanging out with the street community, whatever, and we dreamed of this amazing place next door, which wasn't amazing at all, but compared to where we were living, it was amazing. And we dreamed of getting it, and in the end we got this place to rent, and it was, the rent was exorbitant. And I remember somebody I hadn't seen in 10 years randomly appeared. He used to be my youth worker, Christian youth worker, and then he had gone overseas, and I think he'd done really well for himself, a very smart guy. And he randomly made contact out of the blue. We kind of had one coffee. He says, "How you going? What do you need?" Oh, I can underwrite that for a while. Boom, done. Walked out of my life, left me underwriting that, gave me money weekly to get us started for a few years. I love that. I love that God resources his visions. I love living like that. Many will have been to Ngāti River Monastery, and again, I feel embarrassed about telling these stories but it is our stories. I remember the fact that we tried to buy Ngāti River Monastery, and nobody told me that you needed a job to get a mortgage. It was a small fine print. Apologies, Keith. I am still not bad on governance. I've learned a bit since then. And I remember that we had we were trying to buy the monastery, and we had no trust funds. We had no entity. We just had God, and he called us. And I remember our Christian mortgage broker was very biblical. He modelled himself on Pontius Pilate. So he washed his hands of us. Because who knew this? Again, I don't know, but once a bank has turned you down for a mortgage, they have transparency. They tell the other banks. It's nice, eh? So all the banks knew that we'd been turned down. So there we are, believing that we wanted to give our life for this monastery, no real income. And we'd already shifted up there, which is another mistake. Don't shift into a place you don't own yet. That's always a problematic thing too. But hey, that's fine, you make those mistakes. And then I remember our mate had asked us to come through to Taranaki and do training for his youth workers. And I said to him, no, he says, look, you said you'd come through and do some training for us. And I said, you don't understand, we're depressed. We can't come through and do training for you. Our lives are falling apart. I've just shifted into a place I can't buy. My wife's crying herself to sleep at night. This ain't going to work. He said, no, you said you'd come and do training. So me and Jenny drove to Taranaki. We always had a white van in those days. And we did this training. And even the training was a complete mockery. My mate was just mocking me. He got a church hall, had a podium with a microphone, introduced me. There was 3 of them. It was a complete mockery. So, it was just a great mock. Anyway, so in the morning tea, the morning tea was at a morning tea break with 3 people. He said, so what's happening in your life? And I said, well, we happen to have shifted into a monastery which we can't buy because nobody's going to give us a mortgage, and they've walked away, etc. It's not a good time. He says, well, here's the card of the mobile lending manager from TSB. This is what he said. He says, and she gave us a mortgage and we're dodgy as hell. So I rang her this is Saturday morning tea. I rang her. I said, hey, cold call. Are you interested? She says, I'll meet you at lunchtime. And because we had no fixed abode, all our paperwork was in the van, the mobile office. So I met her at lunchtime and I just gave her this paperwork and she went, this sort of stuff like that. She says, I'll call you on Monday. So on Monday she rang and she says, look, if I give you this mortgage, you've got to promise me 2 things. You've got to promise me you'll never, ever ask for another cent again in your life. And that you promise that you'll pay it back. We kept one of them. And so we got the mortgage. Basically with no fixed job, no Christian trust. And after 10 years at Ngāti Awa, the River Monastery, we left, there was no mortgage over the place. And we'd built, so much had been built. I mean, David Smart's over there who went and built the chapel and others, but the whole place is a miracle. If you go there now, you watch, it's a miracle. And there was no mortgage over the place in 10 years. All that was built. And there I inhabit our church. And I just feel like we missed out on the miracle. I just feel like we need to change the conversation around money. I don't want somebody to pay. I wanted the privilege of worshipping my God by making my offering. Does that make sense? It's so much more fun when I've got skin in the game. It's so much more real. So I want to encourage us. I just wonder whether we're missing out on what God's got for us. Imagine if all our resources that we had historically been given could be released for Gaza. could be released for Ngāti Toa, could be released for whatever. And we could live in God's provision in the now. I would love that. I would love to live in that world. There were some naughty priests in our diocese who got a lot of publicity the other day, and I've had so many emails about adult nappies, which I don't want to have ever again. No, all joking aside though, got this lovely email from a person I hadn't heard from a long time ago, being very supportive. And it was a guy, Gregory Fontaine, who used to be New Zealand's Race Conciliations. Yep. Anyway, so I know Gregory a little bit, but he sent an email of encouragement about what happened, and that's wonderful. But I remember one of the first times I ever met Gregory, he was doing a talk, and I think I was at a marae in Taita, maybe even the Taita College marae. And it was many, many years ago. And he told the story, and I'll come into land now. He told the story about he had been present, he's mixed race South African, and he told the story that he was in Parliament when Nelson Mandela first was inaugurated. And he told the story of his first speech. And I'm paraphrasing now, but this is what Nelson Mandela meant to have said. He said, "The tragedy is that when some of us in this room, when we die, our lives will have made no difference whatsoever. The worst fear is that some of us in this room, when we die, will have done irreparable damage. But the great hope is that for some of us in this room, when we die, we'll have changed the face of South Africa forever, for good." I want that option for our church. I want that option for us. I want that option when we die, we've left a legacy of people following Jesus, but also a legacy where we've added value. We've added value. That's what I desire to be part of. And we're not going to legislate for that. I actually think this is a hindrance, because I think, again, what I said earlier, it's the more you get to the marginal and the grassroots community, the more faith flourishes. The structure doesn't help faith to flourish, but small communities of faithful people meeting week in, week out, faith lives there. And legacy creation lives there. So what I wonder is this, is whether we can pivot to where vision precedes resource. We say, what's God asking us to do, not what resource have we got? Because what I find is when God gives a vision, he gives the resource. I've found that time and time again. And before we try to go to our respective trusts, why don't we go to ourselves as our starting point? Why would I want the church to have the privilege of paying for investment in God's mission? I wouldn't want anybody. I'd want to have that privilege because I believe in the vision. And so I'll stand by it. And then just maybe we'll find ourselves realising that at the end of it all, we added value. That the kingdom came, we left a legacy of people and place. And we'll be known as that generation who others get to live off the shoulders of. Now again, this message is being recorded because it's not for us, it's for all of us. That makes sense? I'm not sort of saying, only you in this room, why don't you pull out your credit card? No! It's for all of us. Everybody gets to play. Everybody gets to experience the generosity of God. Everybody gets to find a vision that's worth laying your life down for, because that's what it means to follow Jesus. We all get that option. And everybody in our community gets that option. And Again, my favourite saying in life is every great work of God begins with first it's impossible, then it's difficult, and then it's done. I want everybody to experience that in our church. I just wonder whether we can pivot to some more interesting conversations around money